All right, we might get started. So my name's Tristan Harwood. I'm a lecturer in CATS, and I'm standing in for David Square to introduce, I guess, speaker today, Mia Bow. And David, this will be my last time, so we'll get David back shortly. It's my cultural responsibility to acknowledge the country where we meet today, the unceded territories of the Bunurong and Woiwurrung of the Kulin Nation. This country is instilled with and instills a long tradition of Bunurong theory, practice, and presence. For millennia, the five nations within the Kulin Alliance have practiced and continue to practice relations with each other and to care for the land with regard for each other's jurisdiction, governance, and sovereignty. I give my respects to their elders and I extend my respects to any mob here today. I know we've got a few. So to Mia Bow. Mia Bow is a painter from Meanjin, Brisbane, with Butchulla and Burmese ancestry. The inheritance and disinheritance of both cultures is the focus of her practice. Mia's paintings respond, sometimes obliquely, to historical and contemporary acts of violence perpetrated on the people and lands of Burma and so-called Australia. Mia has shown her work at galleries and museums all over this continent, including solo exhibitions at Sydney Contemporary, Melbourne Art Fair, Penny Contemporary, and Milani Gallery, and in group settings at the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane and Craft Victoria and the Spring 1883 Art Fair in Melbourne. She was a winner she was a 2021 winner of the Brett Whiteley Travelling Art Scholarship and has been a finalist in the Koori Male Indigenous Art Award, the National Capital Art Prize, and the Darebin Art Prize. Bow was a Gertrude Contemporary Studio Artist from 2022 to 2024, and her work has been published in Vogue Living, RUSSH, The Design Files, Vault, and Monster Children. Mia has held solo exhibitions at Sutton Gallery, Rosalind Oxley 9 Gallery, and has been included in curated exhibitions at Monash University Museum of Art and the National Gallery of Victoria. Her future projects include solo exhibitions at Hervey Bay Regional Gallery, and she's currently a guest in drawing and printmaking at the VCA. Please make Mia Bow welcome.
Hello, thank you all for coming. I would like to also start with the acknowledgement of country. I know sometimes acknowledgement of country can sound tokenistic, but it's when you hear them multiple times a week, but it's extremely worthwhile and necessary to acknowledge the land that we live and work on was stolen, and it was stolen violently. And also right now it's worthwhile acknowledging that we are witnessing an extraordinarily strong attempt to rewrite history in front of our eyes in Gaza. So let's take a moment to acknowledge the history of the land we are on and that we are all, or mostly, visitors. I'm gonna just play this video in the background while I'm talking a little bit. It's some footage I took while I was on a residency a few weeks ago on Butchulla country on Koori. Was once known as Fraser Island. So yeah, I'll just be playing while I give a bit of an introduction to how I started my art practice and up until my sort of first body of work. Yeah. So yes, my ancestry focuses a lot of my work and my thinking. I'm both Butchulla, Burmese, and a little bit of Irish. All three of these places have been colonized by the British. So you can see why these topics take up my thinking and a lot of my art practice. It is a topic so huge, with consequences so wide that I will only ever scratch the surface of trying to understand it. Mostly I've worked in painting because I like the immediacy of it. I'm very impatient, and so painting and drawing what has worked best for me to translate my ideas quickly. I didn't do a fine arts degree. Instead, I studied art history at the University of Queensland. I felt like I needed more of a reason for myself to create art. I wanted to feel more qualified. Not that a university degree is the only way to be qualified at all, but without this sort of learnt cultural knowledge through family, I found art history gave me context to create the work I wanted to make. In 2020, I was coming towards the end of my degree, and I wanted to have an exhibition. I hadn't really painted too much before, but I grew up in Brisbane around a lot of really important political Indigenous artists, and I knew that was the sort of art I wanted to make. So I approached a small gallery in Brisbane called Open House Collective, asked them to have an exhibition. They had a lot of trust in me. I got a studio in West End, and then I started my first sort of body of research into a history that I didn't know much about at the time, and I've since found that most people still don't know much about it. Oh, there we go. So I started my research into the history of the Queensland Native Police. So the Queensland Native Police operated for about 50 years, between 1849 and 1904. It was made up of Aboriginal troopers led by white officers. The main objective of the Native Police was essentially to stop all resistance to colonisation, to protect the lives, livelihoods, and property of European settlers. The very important historian, Henry Reynolds, described the Native Police Force as the most violent organisation in Australian history. It is estimated that in those 50 years, the Native Police killed over 40,000 Aboriginal people. We will never know how many Aboriginal people were killed in this period because there were no official records kept. And there were many different reasons why, how Aboriginal men came to be Native police officers. Often they were victims of massacres themselves and saw other Aboriginal men well-fed, clothed, and with a gun, so they joined the force. Or otherwise, they were simply stolen from their families and their land, and they were often sent thousands of kilometres away from their homelands. And if they tried to escape back home, they were hunted down by the other Native police officers. In all of the Native police stations around Queensland, there were no jails found. This was not a system of policing with trial. It was a system of massacre and murder. And it's a very dark history, and I don't think it's part of sort of any high school curriculum. Native police existed all around Australia, and they also existed in other empires that British had in India and Burma, etc., to turn people against their own people. And in my research, I found that one of my ancestors, Jack Noble, Wanamata, was a Native police officer. He was taken from his home, Gari, when he was 14 and was barracked in central Queensland. There's actually quite a lot written about him online and in books because he was one of the black trackers to help track down Ned Kelly in Victoria. And this sort of led into my art making that included art history, Australian history, and this desire to talk about history that we should know about and is ignored in Australia, especially. I'll just start with these first paintings I did for a group show last year at the National Portrait Gallery. I think it was maybe one of the first times they took down a lot of their permanent collection and they commissioned like 30 artists around Australia around this very broad topic of identity. And these 3 panels just I've simplified the story of my ancestor, Wanamata, of like the before, during, and after of being a black tracker. The before is he's on the sandy hills of Gari, dingoes. The second is when he is a black tracker. I've got a little mention of Ned Kelly in the top, and there's a little illustration on the top of the middle canvas that I'll go into in the next slide. And then the third panel is his life after being a tracker. I've listed all the missions he was pushed around to after working as a tracker, and it was a form of punishment to push people around to different missions. There's records saying that him and his wife Roberta would complain about the conditions at missions, and then they'd be pushed around, and they weren't able to sort of go back to their homelands to die. So yeah, I'll go through. These are some other paintings I did for my first exhibition, and I was very focused on art history at this period. And this painting here by Goya has been reinterpreted by many artists to talk about different tragedies in history. Manet did one, Yu Minjun, the contemporary Chinese artist, did one. And I wanted to do my own version of it to talk about, or to show this violence of blacks killing blacks, and with the blindfolds. And yeah, I was quite literal when I first started painting, I think. And then I became quite preoccupied with Sydney Nolan, because I found we had 2 points of reference with each other. So he famously painted Ned Kelly, and I wanted to paint sort of a note to it with this black tracker on the horse. And then also he painted a lot about Eliza Fraser. Oh, wait. Oh no, I missed that one. It's further down. But Eliza Fraser, the namesake for Fraser Island, Gari, and her story is complicated, but she is, I don't know, people say she is the reason to blame why the colonization of Gari was so violent, because she got shipwrecked on the island and then told all these stories and lies about the Butchulla people being savages, and those stories then sort of informed how the takeover of the island went. And these are just some other works I did, I think 2 years ago now, to talk about the progression of policing in Australia, starting with the native police officers and the protests. And then this work I'll talk about a little bit more in the future, but it was about this idea of these trials of these deaths in custody, often decided by all white juries, white judges. So yeah, this is some other work. So these are works I did at the end of 2021, and I was looking with Sydney Nolan as one of my references and Gari as the other reference, and I wanted to acknowledge that my entry points into this history was through these colonial figures of Sydney Nolan, my ancestor, Wanamata, and Eliza Fraser. There was this quote I'd read by the American Russian cultural theorist Svetlana Boym, this idea of nostalgia. Her definition is, I would define it as a longing for a home that no longer exists or has never existed. Nostalgia is a sentiment of loss and displacement, but it is also a romance with one's own fantasy. So I was wanting to depict this, the island of Gari and the history of it in this sort of dystopian way, with these colonial references and like disinheritance and inheritance of this culture. And I was still, taking from art history and Sydney Nolan's paintings to put him on these uncanny landscapes. And this is his painting of Eliza Fraser on the island. And yeah, I liked the idea of sort of trying to show alternative perspectives to learnings of history, while at the same time learning about it myself and it, yeah, being through these colonial stories. And then after sort of being preoccupied with history, I wanted to focus more on contemporary stories about policing and deaths in custody. I spent a bit of time in Mapuante or Alice Springs in 2022 and 2024. It was after the death in custody of Kumanjai Walker. He was a Warlpiri man who was shot and killed by police while resisting arrest in the community of Yuendamu. He was 19 years old. Constable Zachary Rolfe was charged with his murder, but was eventually acquitted. My dad was one of the barristers working for the Walker family. That's my dad and my sister. So I went up a couple of times to watch the coronial inquest. First time I went, I watched the family give evidence, and then the second time I went was watching Zachary Rolfe give evidence. And these trips really informed my exhibition at the NGV last year, or Melbourne Now. So not just those trips and research into deaths in custody were the focus of the show, but also the NGV asked me to choose works from their permanent collection to sit alongside my works. And these are two of the ones that there was about 5 more, but these are the 2 ones that inspired the other works. And these were artworks that I had studied while I was doing my art history degree. And I was really obsessed with Albert Namatjira and his life story. So I chose these works because I really like how these artists work in the in social realism. Especially Noel Counihan. If you don't know him, he's I think he was from Melbourne, and he lived in like the mid 20th century, and he mostly did printmaking and made work. He was anarchist and unionist and made works about the poor and the suffering and of Australia. And I think this is a very important print of Albert Namatjira. The cross as well. And so I wanted my works that sat alongside the other works to be about, to be sort of a social realism take of experiences for non-white people with police in Australia today. And I did a big mural behind it to create some sort of almost like a theatre backdrop to these stories. And this one here is another reference to the all-white juries who decide if a police officer is guilty or not when killing Aboriginal people. And this work here is called Aboriginal Liaison Officer. And in lots of parts in the country, when making arrests of Aboriginal people in community, police officers are required to have an Aboriginal liaison officer present when making the arrests. And I found this quite interesting sort of thread between this idea of the native police officers to the contemporary version of like, an Aboriginal liaison officer. And yeah, what's next? I won't talk about these works too much, but I did want to include some mention of works I've done about Myanmar and Burma, because it's another sort of stories that most people in the world do not know about. But they have one of the longest ongoing civil wars happening. There was a military coup in 2021, another one, and people live under intense dictatorship, and a lot of students and artists have had to flee cities, they've had to flee the country, and a lot of them have joined these armies in the border states to fight against the military junta. So yeah, I won't go too much into it. If you're interested, I know some good books about it if you want to read up about it. I'll just mention this little video game here I found quite interesting. So these Burmese IT people have fled the country a few years ago, and they created this game where you're a Burmese freedom fighter killing military people, and the ad money from the game goes into supporting the freedom fighters in Burma today. And I found it incredibly Black Mirror-ish, this like dystopian reality that is Burma. Okay, vibe change. This is at the start of this year, I went to Mexico City on a residency. And before I went, I was really interested in, look, I feel like my practice up until this point had been looking at the past, looking at contemporary lives, and then I was starting to think more about this idea of the future, and specifically in terms of science fiction, speculative fiction thinking. And so going into Mexico City, I was preoccupied with that, and Mexico City is extremely surreal and science fiction-y in a lot of ways. So yeah, these really fostered my ideas. And at the same time, I was reading a lot of science fiction films. I was reading a lot of books by Octavia Butler and War of the Worlds, which H.G. Wells based on British imperialism. Of course, George Orwell, Frankenstein, and then I started reading a bit of Ursula Le Guin. And I came across this quote that sort of affirmed this feeling I had, where I wanted to use science fiction to my thinking for future works. And she says that science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. And going off my reading list, my favorite science fiction is one that talks about contemporary or historical issues from the perspectives of the disadvantaged. And so for my show that was a few months ago at RUSSH and Oxley, I wanted to create my own science fiction story. It was called The Aboriginal Robot. I saw that exhibition as sort of the first entry into this new line of thinking. So yeah, that's the story there. So it's set in this not so distant dystopian land, where the sort of earth is almost beyond repair, and a lot of people have had to leave the planet, and so governments create this Aboriginal robot called the Dreaming Machine with Aboriginal land caretaking knowledge in it. And in my story, the robot learns about those who have profited off the land and exploited the land, and governments that have encouraged it. And it begins a class revolution. There's so many holes in this story, like it's not complete, but I have wanting to use it as a way to actually engage with Aboriginal land caretaking practices. So these are the paintings from the exhibition. It's got a few. And I've taken from science fiction films a bit, and aesthetics. Like this is taken a bit from a scene from Space Odyssey. But yeah, changed it up. And this gives a little bit of 1984 with the message of the robot streaming down on people. And And then the image on the left, the sort of layout was taken from a photo of bushfires on Koori in 2021. And it kind of leads into my next body of work that I'm still working out, and I'm not too sure how it will look, but I've been lately some more. My residency on Hervey Bay was about a month ago now, and I was doing research on lost and recovered fire management skills. The fires in 2021 were catastrophic, and it was started because of a campfire that wasn't put out properly by tourists. And it led to 87,000 hectares of the island being burnt. And since then, the state government has been working with Butchulla rangers to redevelop cultural burning practices to combine science with Butchulla land knowledge. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, because when I was there and I was speaking with Butchulla park rangers about fire management, they said that the key missing ingredient is that we don't live on the land anymore. So not a lot of people live on the island. There's 2 resorts. A lot of people live on the mainland in Hervey Bay, and I don't know what I thought going into it, but I had this idea of, there's some key ingredient that the lost knowledge that they're just not doing, but it's so much deeper than that, and it's more just saying about the consequences of people being forcibly removed off their land. So I'm unsure where this will go, but that's where my thinking is at the moment. And yeah, I'll finish.
All right. Thanks so much, Mia. That was great. So much in that. I wonder if there's any questions from people in the audience for Mia. Yeah.
A lot of the ways I've sort of gotten information about Burma has been through books. And I try to reach out to my family in Burma, but they can't, like that Facebook is watched, so I can't really speak to anyone in Burma about it. But yeah, it's sort of this thinking that I sort of go between a lot of Australian issues, Burma, and it's kind of confusing. And at the moment, Burma feels like it's like on the back burner for me. But are you asking like just like where I get information from, or like? Yeah, I mean it is definitely fear. I don't know if, yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd be able to go to Burma anytime soon. I don't post a lot about it online though. Like I don't know how much intelligence the government would have on my Instagram page, but it is scary. And like I've made a friend who's an artist from Burma, and she's since moved to Melbourne last year, and she had to flee the country. She grew up in Yangon, and she had to go to a refugee camp for like a year and a half on the Thailand border, and she might not be able to ever go back. So I feel like it's sort of like a responsibility as someone who has a connection to this place. I'm not from there. Like if I can't go back there, it's it's not my like homeland that I grew up in. So I think it's sort of like a responsibility to talk about it because so many artists can't from there. So yeah, that's my approach to it. I wish I was a good writer. I'm not a good writer, but I love, I get so much of my information from reading, and poetry specifically. I recently did an exhibition with, or like inspired by and sort of in collaboration with this poet, Lionel Fogarty. So yeah, I'm a bit scared to start writing actually, but I prefer to take from writers and we'll collaborate with them to create works. And yeah, I don't know. Thanks for reading it. I prefer, like, I quite liked writing art history research papers. Like, I liked critiquing and finding sort of historical connections between artists. But I think writing as like a personal expression is, yeah, not my thing.
Tessa?
Yeah. There's definitely inspiration from like Russell Drysdale, his elongated figures in landscape, but I've been trying to distance myself from that because I don't really think about them anymore um, when making works. It really is like, I don't think I could really explain it. I mean, I remember when I first started doing figures, I was like, how do I feel? I feel bloated and uncomfortable in my body. Like, I'm going to paint figures like that. And it just sort of went on from there. I liked the uncanniness to it. I couldn't do super realistic figures if I tried. So it came from sort of, yeah, trying to work out how I can make it look sort of interesting in that way. Mm. Hey. Yeah, definitely. Lots of drawings. I last year at Gertrude for my show at Glasshouse, it was a show of just of ink drawings about this specific prison in Burma. I prefer drawings really, but I think my paintings are just a lot more full of ideas. So yeah, a lot of preparation, but I don't have a formula. I don't have like I do this and then this and this because yeah, still working that out. Beautiful Tony Armstrong. I
Give us some background
oh
on.
yes, I painted Tony Armstrong for the Archibald Prize this year, and it's currently on tour to regional galleries around Australia. We just like followed each other on Instagram, and then I like met him at a festival, and then I was like, he's got a really beautiful face, and everyone loves him, and so I just asked him. And at first, he was really nervous, and he didn't want to do it, and then he came around to it. And yeah, he's just a cool person that I wanted to meet and hang out. The Archibald Prize is this weird art prize because it's so showy and so Sydney, and you win, you get $100,000, and it's like a weird game show, but it's a really nice excuse for painters to be able to reach out to people they admire or meet to paint their portrait. But yeah, it's cool, dude.
If there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for that, Mia. I was thinking about that, was it Svetlana Boym quote about nostalgia and this longing for home, and it made me think of a Stuart Hall quote, and he writes that when there's an impossibility of return, you write home into being. And so maybe there's something in that. I was thinking about the Butchulla works and the possibility there. But so much in that.
There's a lot in that. Sorry, I speak really fast.
It was great. And check Mia out if you haven't already. The painting, obviously. At galleries, online, wherever you like to see work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was so close.
Yeah,
Was it?
good. That was...
Is it what it's meant to?